Welcome to Episode 9 with Carol Grever.
Where meditation meets daily life, this is the Meditation Freedom Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Meditation Freedom Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about authenticity, in my view, and the perils of not living an authentic life. And the person that comes to my mind is Joseph Campbell. He talked a lot about the wasteland, which is a land where people live inauthentic lives, never doing a thing they truly want because either the supernatural laws required them to live as directed by their clergy, or maybe society says this is the way you're supposed to live, or your parents, and so forth. And in the case of our guest today, she was married to someone who was living like that for many, many years. And that causes a lot of pain and suffering for both the person that has to live inauthentically or feels they have to live inauthentically, and then the people that they affect around them. But it, of course, can be applied in many other ways. And one of the ways Joseph Campbell talked about the wasteland is that people who are living inauthentically are fulfilling purposes that are not properly theirs or have been put upon them as inescapable laws. And he says that's killer. People not living from within their own center. And another way he articulates it is, are they going to follow the way of their own zeal, the star that's dawned for them, or do they do what daddy and mother and friends want them to do? The adventure is always in the dark forest, and there's something perilous about it. But it's even much more damaging to not to live authentically. Fortunately for Carol, I think this all turned out really good, and they turned a very difficult event into an ally. And Joseph Campbell said, "It is by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure." Carol Grever became sort of an expert and go-to person for mixed orientation relationships since the 2001 publication of her first book, My Husband is Gay. And since then, she's authored 3 other books. When Carol's husband came out after 30 years of having hidden homosexuality, he having basically led a double life, it came as a total shock to Carol. But then she learned and used that journey of grief and its lessons to help others address the challenge. And so she started writing and doing a documentary and talking about her own personal story to help many others of straight spouses. So then Carol became a recognized spokeswoman, an advocate for straight spouses. Because she was kind of the go-to person for these types of questions relating to homosexuality and how it relates to straight spouses, she was then consequently interviewed on major network television shows and radio shows, the Anderson Cooper, Good Morning America, and The Early Show, amongst many others. And now whenever a public figure comes out of the closet, Carol is one of the people that the media seeks out as a source of information. Now, she's also published a memoir called Memoir, Quilt, A Family Narrative, and she also published a volume of poetry from which she'll read in this interview called Glimpses of Memoir and Poetry. And this particular book received the Colorado Authors League 2013 prize for poetry collections. And Carol is an Oklahoma native and an adopted Coloradan. She's a former English professor and a staffing company owner. And then she has many more activities that she's part of in her local community. And Carol has also received numerous honors, including the Colorado Business and Professional Women's Woman of the Year and Community Service Award, Entrepreneur of Distinction, Boulder's Business Pacesetter, and Boulder County Business Hall of Fame. She's also past president of the Boulder Rotary Club and has chaired the Boulder Chamber of Commerce, the Private Industry Council, and the Board of Trustees at Naropa University. So with that, let's get right into the interview with Carol Grever. Thanks so much, Carol, for joining me in this podcast. I really appreciate you're taking your time out and joining this podcast.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, my podcast is about meditation and how people come to a path of meditation practice. And one of the ways that I like to introduce the guests to them is by talking about how what prompted you, what event in your life, or maybe multiple events, prompted you to seek out a practice.
One teacher said that chaos is a very good thing, and I guess it was chaos in my personal life that got me started on meditation, because I was looking for a way to calm down after my husband came out. We'd been married for 30 years and we're business partners, and I had reared two wonderful sons and so on. We had a life together, and then he came out. And so the rug was pulled out, and I needed a way to sort of calm down, and also to find meaning in what was going on in my life. It was such an abrupt change. Everything changed.
And for the people that are listening, how many years were you together before he came out?
We had been married for 30 years at the time he came out. And he had known that he was gay for most of that time and had acted on it. So he had this sort of double life for almost all of those years. I had absolutely no clue. And I guess I was extremely naive. I know I was trusting. And it really came as a shock to me when what he said was, I have homosexual tendencies. But those tendencies had been acted on for a long, long, long time by the time he told me that. So meditation became my refuge, really. It was a way to let go, to be in the moment, not to go back to all the what ifs and how stupid I am and all of that. I could get into the present moment by sitting meditation. And so I took training just to do that. And
I imagine that didn't just go from one day to the next.
Indeed, it did. We were business partners, and we had a large business. So we needed to have some time to adjust to this new information and to figure out what we were going to do next. We didn't know whether we wanted to stay together and try to still be a married couple under these circumstances, or whether we needed to just divorce and go our separate ways. So, and we also had this business to take care of. So we put our personal life kind of on the back burner to try to figure out what came next with this business. We ended up selling it, but it took about 4 years before we actually lived apart. During the beginning of that, we were trying to make our marriage work, and then when we decided we were unable to do that, we did separate. During that 4 years, I was taking Shambhala training. These are weekend retreats, and it's meditation training. It's 8 hours a day of meditation. It's a retreat setting, and that's how I learned to use meditation in order to really keep my sanity.
Yeah, and what are some of the breakthroughs or things that you struggled with while you were on the cushion or walking meditation? What were some of the things that struck you or that transformed and changed your thinking?
I think, as I said before, to stay in the present moment and not try to go back and second guess everything. Also, I learned to follow the breath. I figured out that if I can stay with my own breath, if I can follow the breath, whatever is happening will pass. Mm-hmm. So the whole concept of impermanence became very real to me. Whatever it is will pass. And I was learning about the depth of my own spirit, I think, because I really didn't have a lot of anger. I mostly had sadness over this. I was in deep grief. I felt as if someone dear had died. And in a way that had happened because the man that I thought I knew so well was not that man.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt betrayed, of course. I felt angry at times, but mostly I felt very, very sad.
And was one of the reasons why you were attracted to Pema Chodron, because that's one of her main messages is about uncertainty, not knowing, having the rug pulled under, the groundlessness, everything falling apart. It seems to be that's kind of her trademark.
It is. And she went through a kind of similar experiences with a divorce before she became a nun. And her husband basically went away with another woman. And I think that gave her a depth of understanding for situations like mine. But the first time I met with Pema one-on-one, we had an interview, and she told me that having the rug pulled out could be very good news. And I thought, this woman must be crazy, because I was in the depth of my sorrow at that moment. But she then told me a little bit about her own experience, but she also said that this is an opportunity to grow. And that is how I began to look at it. I also am very fortunate in that I live in Boulder, Colorado, and Naropa University is here.
Right.
And I was friends with a woman in the psychology department who introduced me. I was looking for a meditation instructor, and she introduced me to Acharya Dale Azrael, who is well known. I didn't know that at the time, but she's a wonderful teacher of Dharma, and she became my meditation instructor. So that's how I actually began. And then I started doing the 13 weekend series of Shambhala training, and that is meditation intensive. Then I went with the Shambhala community to the Rocky Mountain Dharma Center, and I had some longer retreats there with Pema Chodron. So that's how I got connected with Pema. And I have followed her teachings then ever since, along with others. I read a great deal, and I lead a Dharma discussion group in my home. It's a kind of small sangha, and we meet once a week, and we read the same thing, and then we have deep discussion about what we have read. And that's become very, very important to me, along with meditation practice and Lojong practice, and the other ways of practicing Dharma.
And is that something that works for people in similar situations as yours too? Is it like the Sangha that you created in your own home? Is that a little bit targeted towards people that have similar struggles?
Not necessarily. I work with straight spouses, as we are called, in other ways. And I've written books on straight spouse recovery that grew out of my own experience, but I've interviewed hundreds of other men and women whose spouses came out. I wrote 2 books on the basis of those interviews and produced DVD, a documentary DVD with interviews also.
When you were with Pema Chodron and she talked about how this is an opportunity, how did that become an opportunity for you then? What insight did you start getting about who you were, or what reality, the nature of reality was, that formerly you had a different idea and that now the rug was being pulled under it?
I think I learned how strong I can be. I felt devalued at first. I felt unworthy. I thought there must be something wrong with me. So I was blaming myself at the beginning. And I learned through these quiet times, these quiet hours, that this has nothing to do really with me. The fact that my husband is gay, it is who he is, and he needed to become more authentic in his own life. And I came to appreciate that. So that was one of the real benefits of the meditation practice. In those hours, I could sit with it and begin to understand it and begin to see that this is not a crisis. It doesn't have to remain a crisis, that we can both come through it. We can both pass through it.
So you develop compassion then by understanding the struggle for being authentic. It seems like we all struggle with that in some degree or another, because society is always saying, well, this is the way it should be, or your parents say this is the way it should be. And so people start leading inauthentic lives in order to please. And that's such a sad thing, because it creates even more pain.
Absolutely. And I think the final step of healing for a person going through a personal change like this is to learn to forgive what came before, and understand that the other person was doing what they felt they had to do. Mm-hmm. And I really do understand that. My ex-husband is, he is so much happier. He is free. He is authentic. He is married to his partner, his male partner, and they have a wonderful life together. It is so much better. I also remarried. I have a wonderful life. You know, we had to free each other in order to, and understand the motivations in order to pass through it, in order to heal. And forgiveness is a really big piece of that.
And so while you still continue to practice, how do you see your practice now? What does it do for you now?
I think I have learned enough to know that service is the real reward and the real path. I took refuge, became a Buddhist in 1991, and I didn't take the Bodhisattva vow, the Mahayana Bodhisattva vow, until 2008. And I did a deep study of Shantideva and the way of the Bodhisattva. And I took that vow with Dale Azrael. And the gist of that is, the basis of that is to exchange self for other, to put yourself in the other person's place. And it is a vow of service. So since then, I have really devoted my time and energy to service of through the blog, working with straight spouses, doing peer counseling locally with people here, and online through my blog. The books that I've written also are a part of that. So I write and I teach this in this Dharma group. I lead it and lead the discussions and so on. Part of my background is in teaching also. I was a professor for 7 years. And so all of this has come together and is really, I feel that I've reached a sort of perfect circle of activities to act out the Bodhisattva vow. And I take it really seriously.
That's wonderful. You've written a book of poetry to kind of, I read a couple of them, and in it you talk a little bit about how your sense of self and the sense of separateness kind of dissolved, and maybe you could read a couple of them. I'd love to hear them.
I'd love to read them. Thank you for asking. The book is Glimpses, a Memoir in Poetry. And this book is made up of poems that I have written over a number of years. And as I gathered them, I realized that what I had here was a kind of record of turning points through a lifetime. So some of the poems are related directly to my experience as a straight spouse, and some as my experience, they're related to my experiences as a Buddhist. But the ones that you asked me to read are related. This first one is about looking back. This is called Retrospection. Another Christmas season passed. busy and predictable. Ham and yams, green beans and pie, decoration on the door, glitter and glitz. Tree ornaments lovingly hung radiate moving memories. Tiny wedding bell, 1961. First grade painted star. Homemade trifles, knitted and stitched. Trophies from trips, family gifts. Tender mementos of boys, now men. Dear ones gone. Lives transformed. Marriages ended and begun. What was certain wasn't. The impossible happened. Shocks followed humdrum. Christmases came and went. Wreaths hung. Gifts given. Time passed. Prior life with it. It happens this way. Another tree, another feast. A year ends, another begins. Taking down cherished baubles, we pack away the past. Out of sight, but always present. Ornaments and delusions, keen reminders of all we were when we thought we knew.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Thank you. I think this is the last poem in the book, I believe. Yes, almost the last, and it kind of captures the movement of this life.
Right. Yeah, everything is in flux. Everything changes.
It's the impermanence again. Yeah, we cannot escape it, and it's not bad. It's how we grow. It's how we learn, and these reminders are really precious because they take us back to what we thought we knew for sure, and then we realize that maybe it wasn't the same the next year and the next year and the next year. We move forward.
Right. Yeah, and we have this tendency to hold on to things and to want things to be permanent. Yeah, and that's not how anything else in nature works, but somehow we believe that in our case, it might be different. It might be permanent.
Yes. My book group just read Thich Nhat Hanh's No Death, No Fear. And I love his images to illustrate that. But the one of looking at old photographs, the same and yet different. You see yourself 10 years ago and 20 years ago in photographs, and you realize that you're the same person, and yet in each phase you're different, you're changing, you're moving. So nothing is permanent, really. I found a box with my old passports in it, and I looked at those pictures, and I swear I did not look like the same person.
Right.
10 years apart, I would not have recognized myself. So I think it just demonstrates the movement of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Didn't you have another poem, I think it was called Separation or something?
On separation. Yeah. Would you like for me to read it?
Yeah, that'd be great.
On separation. Root bound no more. My white violet settles into fresh soil. Old roots no longer fed velvet stems, fragile blooms. Leaves drooped, freshness faded, constrained it languished. Total change required. Brutal blade cuts horizontal roots, circling inner walls. Confinement slashed. Wounded but vital, cut edges begin to grow. Timid new roots push tenderly past outgrown patterns. Boundaries fall. Rawness feeds renewal.
Yeah, that's a great one too.
Thank you. Yes. And renewal is a daily occurrence.
Yeah. Yeah. And resistance to that, to change is, or friction to change is what causes us so much pain.
Clinging, hanging on, trying to stop the movement. It doesn't happen. It keeps moving.
Right. And then there was one final poem that I liked too. It was really playful. It was called Hip
Granny Hip-Hop.
Yeah.
I'm a grandmother. I have 2 grandchildren. Yes, and this was really just for fun. I was just goofing off when I wrote this. So please understand, this is not great literature. Granny Hip-Hop. My head is aching, my ass is breaking, my thoughts are taking too long to form. My hair is graying, my strength's decaying, my mind is straying, recalling youth. But golden years are calm and dear. It's not too late to contemplate, to heal all hate and mend my fate. My days are free to just be me.
But that's so wonderful. I love that. You know, that's.
I'm always embarrassed when I read it, but it is fun. It's truthful.
Yeah, and that's why I like it, because it's authenticity is more joyful. You know, because you can be who you are instead of feeling restrained by rules and things like that.
Yeah, I think my most difficult years of my long life were spent when I was in business, because I had so many roles that I was trying to fill. I was trying to be what I really was not. And it was miserable for me most of the time, but I kept the front up. And that was exhausting.
It is.
So
yeah.
when we sold that business and I walked away from it, my first thoughts were, who am I really? I don't even know. So that's when I really got into spiritual studies and looking for the answer to that basic question, who am I? And I'm beginning to get a feel for something greater than what I thought I was at that time. In other words, I am a part of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of the whole, the ultimate. I'm not this squeamish little sad person anymore at all.
And that's so liberating that you no longer have to feel like you have to play some role. Or
I believe the word's authenticity, and I'm working toward that. I really want to be as real as I can be.
That's great. I'm happy you're doing it. We all need it. Maybe you can mention the book again that you were actually just reading from, and some of the other books. And then what I'll do is I'll put the links on the website, and then people can go check it out.
Well, that would be very nice. The book I just read from is called Glimpses, a memoir in poetry. It won the Colorado Authors League 2013 prize, and so that was very affirming. The other 2 books that I would mention are on straight spouse recovery. My Husband is Gay, A Woman's Guide to Surviving the Crisis. And the other I wrote along with Deborah Bowman, who is the friend I mentioned at Naropa. She is a PhD psychologist. And it is a long-term recovery book called When Your Spouse Comes Out, a straight mate's recovery manual.
And so this would help people who have this issue with their spouse. But besides, like in your case, you went on a meditation path. But some other people, they may want to go just to a therapist. What do you see? Is that like with everyone a different thing, or with some people they go to a support group, or is it a combination of all?
Yes, it is a combination of all of those, and it also depends on the individual. Some go to private therapists. The Straight Spouse Network is a good resource online, SSN or Straight Spouse Network. There are blogs. Mine is called Straight Spouse Connection, and it's an interactive blog. I think peer groups are very helpful at first because you're able to talk about your own experience, and you tell your story, and it helps to get it off your chest.
Mm-hmm.
But after so many months of doing that, and you hear everybody's story over and over, and you get sort of sick of repeating your own story, and I think that's a sign of growth, because then you're ready to move into a longer term therapy or longer term recovery, and you can do that on your own. But it helps to be able to talk about it, particularly after the game.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and there are a few good books out, but at the time my husband came out, there was nothing on this subject. I could only find one book that dealt with it directly, and that's what prompted me to write one after I finally got through it, because there wasn't very much out there. I think there are more resources now available than there used to be.
That's great. And is it a big issue in the United States still, where a lot of people are still hiding?
You know, it continues to be so. I kept thinking I was going to work myself out of a job, but I haven't with the blog. I get thousands of hits on my website and my blog, and the stories are the same. I think that social pressure and religious pressure and career pressure, all of those things are still enforced. And even though gay marriage is becoming much more accepted, and I'm very happy about that, because there will be, we hope, fewer of these mixed orientation marriages, but it still is happening.
Yeah.
Still is happening. There's still a lot of prejudice, and if a person is in a certain kind of career, he or she may find prejudice in the workforce and difficulty in advancing, and so on. Religious pressure is huge, and it continues.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons shows like this, and then your books and things, we still need to keep talking about it, because people still can't really be themselves and come out, or they're afraid of coming out.
I agree. There's still a lot of prejudice, a lot of fear, and we just have to keep chipping away at it, I think, in whatever way we can.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you getting on the podcast and sharing your stories so wholeheartedly and openly.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Carol Grever. You can find the podcast episode on the website, meditationfreedom.com/009. And please leave a message if you can. Let me know if this episode was interesting to you, or if you had some additional questions that you did not see answered in the interview. I will make sure that all the books that were discussed in this interview and that she's written are linked from within the show notes as well. So you can just go to there if you want to purchase the book and get more information. Just look under resources and I'll have links to each of the books. And also have a link to a DVD documentary that Carol was part of. I just wanted to quickly mention that the podcast, Meditation Freedom Podcast, is now available on Stitcher. I'm not sure who is the type of people that use Stitcher, but it appears that it is primarily used for people that use streaming on their phones. So the quality is a little bit less on the audio, but it helps save bandwidth for end users who are streaming on their smartphones with limited data plans. So if you are one of those people, you can go on Stitcher and download the podcast there. And of course, if you feel inclined, I would love a rating there on Stitcher as well as iTunes. So you can find the link to the podcast on Stitcher by going to the website meditationfreedom.com. There'll be a big logo to Stitcher right on the homepage. Thank you. So thanks again for listening. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of the week or evening, wherever you are. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Meditation Freedom Podcast, where meditation meets daily life.